Hi and welcome to today's episode. Following on from the last episode, we were talking about taking equity in businesses, and a couple of comments had popped up. How do you take equity in businesses and buy businesses when you don't have any money, or you have very little money? You don't need to have millions of pounds or thousands of pounds in the business to take over another business or take equity in a business, and essentially that's what we're going to look to explore today. And I think that you'll find that this episode is very valuable. I think a lot of people will be asking the same sort of question, and I generally think, I hope that more people whet people's appetite more, so that they then start looking at this more, and start looking at to try and take equity in businesses a lot more. John's a bit of an expert in this, so John's going to tell us how to buy businesses with no money.
Right, no problem at all. So I guess that's over to me then. Yeah. So with buying businesses, I think the perception is exactly where Mark said it was. People assume that you need to earn a fair amount of money. So one of the classic things in business is you build up your business and you make profit. So let's just say we made £100,000 profit. So in theory, you could seed £10,000 into 10 businesses and take equity. That's the kind of standard way a lot of people view equity. However, you need to look at why do people want to exit their business? Why do they want to sell you shares in the first place? So there's generally always going to be a motivator there. So it's either going to be a case that the person is aging out. So I refer to them as they're getting older. They're maybe looking at what do you do? What's my legacy? Maybe their kids aren't interested in the business. That happens with pubs and clubs and things like that as well. You might not necessarily do what your dad did, and you might not be interested in taking over his business. So then you have to look at it and say, right, well, how are we going to do this? We need to either broker a deal where we get money for it, or we broker a deal where I bring somebody else to run it and then I get money for the profit it produces. So generally when that's happening and understanding that is really key. So when I started looking at this, I was thinking, right, I've got a bit of profit sitting to the side, I'll maybe start to look at this. I can't buy anything that's many millions of pounds, but I could maybe buy something. Maybe I've got 30, 40 grand, I could probably buy some decent equity with it. So when I kind of realised that a lot of the people I knew that acquire businesses, they were very, very wealthy people, but they weren't liquid. All their money was tied up in businesses, equity, other deals. So it's almost like they were keeping themselves poor. And I'm thinking, that seems counterintuitive. Surely you need this money to buy these assets. So the more I looked at it, I was kind of thinking, well, hold on, that means that they're not buying it that way. If they're not sitting with the million in the bank to do that. And I've actually seen it where I've sat on the other side of the fence, where I was partner with a guy that was buying a digital agency here in Glasgow. And interestingly, the accountant asked to see the money in the bank that was for the acquisition, and that's the first time I've ever seen that being asked, because it's not really important about how it's done, it's more about how do they get their money. So most business owners, if you go to buy a company, they obviously have to put an evaluation on the business. Now ideally it'll just be based on either the EBITDA, the amortization, the debt, anything that's sitting against it as liabilities of the business, that's its assets. But to look at it in a really simple form, the business they're saying is worth £1 million. It's got £250,000 of debt by way of a loan or an extension or a credit or a rolling credit line. So really the business is worth 750,000. So it's important that that gets factored in. But let's just say that you're thinking, right, the business is worth what they're saying it's worth. So for all intents and purposes, £1 million, the debts, everything's been factored in, it's £1 million to keep the math easy. You can literally take their books and their business plan to a bank, and if the bank will back that deal, then it's a good deal anyway. So you just use the bank as your risk assessor to say, look, and it doesn't need to be a bank, it could be any kind of finance house. But to buy a business like that, you only require to actually have 30% of the money. So to buy a £1 million business as value, you'd only need 300k. So if me and you decide to do that deal together, that could be 150k each. Now, that's still a substantial amount of money. So you're thinking, well, hold on, 150k, who's got that lying around? These guys don't, so how are they doing that? So really what it is it comes down to a negotiation. So let's say it's yourself, you're the guy with the £1 million business, and me and say Gary are investing in the company. I could kind of turn around to you and say, look, I understand you want to get your £1 million out. That makes complete sense, and we're not going to do a deal where you don't get something in your hand. I just don't want that. I want you to be happy with the deal. So why don't we agree, and this is where it comes into negotiation, why don't we agree that 40% up front, so that 400 grand is in your account today, and then I'll pay you 30% year 2, 30% year 3, so that I know that you won't strip the asset down, you won't take all the clients away or the assets, and I'm not left holding like a wrapper, a very expensive wrapper, rather than the company, which is what I want. So that achieves two things. It locks them in that they can't strip the asset there, and then in addition to that, it allows me the time to document their processes. So I can then say, right, I want to make sure I understand the business fully, that they're involved, that there's not like something untoward happening with it. But if you think about it, I can then get the 30% of the 40%. So the 400 grand, 30% of that is like what, 120? So it's 60 grand each, which, you know, is something you could take a loan or you could mortgage your house to get the money out. So you could easily put that in and get it. Now, the beauty of it is, as soon as you acquire the asset, well, that business is now yours. So you can then leverage the business to go back and raise a loan against the business saying, I need X, which would then recompensate you for the money you put in. So even though you might have took it out of your house to buy it, you can literally square yourself right back up at the other side of it. There might even be cash in the business, depending on how it's been done. Now, as soon as you have control of the asset, you can then effectively say, well, hold on, Market Mavens pays my salary, or Hybrid Anchor pays my salary, so I don't need a salary out of this. So the director's salary goes to zero, company car goes to zero, probably quite a lot of that stuff you already have, like your accounting and all this kind of stuff. So you simplify the business, and that creates like a buffer, like a chunk, which can also be used to credit yourself back. So when I've looked at it in the past, that's exactly the way I try to do it, is you structure the deal where it's favourable to you. And a lot of these kind of companies, they just want the money out. So they're thinking, how do I get my £1 million out of the business? I don't care how it's achieved, I just want my £1 million. So if you can actually buy it with their own profits within the business by coming in and doing that, and you can package it in such a way that you can get them out of the company, but they get what they want. In other deals, it'll be a case that they want to retain 20% or pass 20% onto their son or their daughter, and that's cool. So it's all about structuring the deal. But I think you can see from that, like, we're talking about a much smaller number, and it's like numbers within numbers within numbers. That's on a big asset that's worth £1 million. You can also buy assets that are minus value, like it's actually worth minus 100k, and it's expensive to wind the business up. So if you kind of say, well, look, I would take over the business and take on the debt, but obviously if I'm doing that, I'm going to buy your shares for £1. Now the pound is just the transaction, so you can get the shareholding, but that's again another way of buying a business for no money. But interestingly, the bank and the finance houses are much more set up to look after the first asset because it has intrinsic value. The second thing doesn't have any value, so you're going to find it really hard to leverage debt or loans or finance against it to clear this debt out. But again, you can trim that company down, so you can look at it and say there's too many staff, there's wasteful processes, why have we got a print division, why have we got this, why have we got that, and you can cut those costs out, square the thing up, and then over, let's say, 2 years, bring it back up to health. Remember, you're getting your salary from your own company, so you don't need a salary for here. So even you just taking that director's burden off the company for a couple of years is enough to kind of square it up. But that's the two main methods for a distressed asset or a valuable asset. And that could be any number, it could be multiple £1 million company to do it. So that's two ways that you can do that with no money.
And could you go about financing it as well? So is there another way of actually taking like finance out to buy a business?
So this is one of the ways I tried to do this quite recently. So I wrote a business plan, and I basically wrote out, like, this is what I'm looking for, and I was looking for £1.4 million for a 40% share of an asset. And the two options that I had open to me were, I could either build a company from scratch and they would get 40% of it for putting the money in, or I could take the same money and acquire 3 businesses that are in that space, merge them all together, and then leverage that asset base where their 40% is instantly worth something from day one. And I think it's one of those things where I've said, right, I'll put in the money and you put in the money, or me and Gary will put in the money. that's fine. But I could also say, right, I don't actually have the 300,000. So what I'll do is I'll go to an investor and I'll say, right, this is what I'm proposing. You put in the money and I'll basically run the business. So I'll not take any salary until you've been paid back what you put into the company. And then you'll have your shareholding in perpetuity if you want it, or I'll buy you out at the other side. A lot of investors will make that deal, especially if you have a track record of doing that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be a major thing, because you could be saying, like, look, you're in it for 300 grand, it's £1 million company. Even if we sold it like the next day, you would get your money back. Really, it's just a means to an end to kind of get that. They can access that because they could leverage against their portfolio, which maybe me or you or other people can't, because they don't have as many assets to pull from. So they don't actually take the money out of the companies, they take debt against it in order to allow them to grow. So it's like growth capital. And I'm like, that's another great way of doing that, because remember I was saying a couple of episodes back, we are the rare bird. It's the driver that's the important part of that. The investor doesn't want a job. They don't want to be sitting on top of that asset going, oh, do this and do that, and Becky in HR needs to be fired, and what's Greg doing? He's not doing his work. His timesheet isn't. They don't want to be doing that. They want to just say, there's the money, and then you basically make them a lot of money back. And as soon as you've got a track record of doing that, you're going to attract more of those kind of deals to you. But I think the key is not to tie yourself into the infrastructure of the company. So if you're very transparent and say, look, I'm doing 10 or 20 or 30 deals like this, then the investor isn't thinking that you've got a full-time job looking after that one asset. You'll treat it as one of the companies in your group and leverage your infrastructure to look after the asset. Whereas a lot of people, you'll see it in Dragons Den, where they're like, but how much of your time are you putting in this? And they get really cagey about people sitting in the kind of what you call a backseat driver. You know, it's like, I bought the asset, it's this kind of way. But I don't think that's a negative if you have a track record of showing exactly how you would do it. But that's how you would do it with an investor.
Do you think it's not a bit risky as well? Like, you know, you're talking about, you know, you're paying for the business by taking the profits out of the company. What if you know, something happens, like another pandemic or whatever, and you can't get the profits out of the company?
That's the risk that you have with it. So it's like, basically the way the deal would work is, if there was profits, you would pay them out. If there wasn't profits, you would just hand the business back to them. So it's like it would return back to your ownership. So it's almost like you get a chance to take a punt at doing it. So it's almost like a zero risk game. There is, of course, some risks. You might lose that initial principal money.
The poor person that's retiring.
Yeah, exactly.
Get back in.
Sorry, dude, you're back in again. You're at tag in. But I think you look at it in the sense of, you know, a year or 2 years is a long, long time. And there's lots of things you can do with businesses. I think the main one to kind of remember is one of the businesses I tried to buy quite recently. I'm saying quite recently, it was about 3 years ago. But looking at it, like, I knew that the two directors were paying themselves probably about 80,000 each. And then they both had company cars. And I'm thinking, even just taking that cost, pardon me, even taking that cost away for the business, that's like 160,000 for day one. I don't need that. Remember, I only need 12k, so I'm not really bothered about whether it's massive or it's not. And I kind of like to look at it in the sense of, I will always look after the investor the way I would look after a staff member or a client. They put the money in, so they need to be made whole. So if the deal is you put 300k in and I turn it into 400k, then that's the deal. So until you got your 400k back, I'm not touching a penny of that money. If it's me and you and we're going into a partnership, it's important to me that you have a core salary, that you have like a certain range of kind of income and expenditure and stuff, so that you don't feel that it's like unequal, you know, that I'm taking more than what my half is. It's important to me that you're not cutting off that person's like enjoyment of the business. Like, they need to enjoy it the same way as we enjoy coming to work. If you came to Mavens, you're thinking, oh, he makes the same as me and he doesn't do anything. That's a genuine thing. You have to think about stuff like that. But I always try to like kind of build a fair deal with the person. So when I'm kind of taking equity, I'll often say, like, look, let's set aside 10k as a buffer in the business, and then with the profits that we have, I'll not take a salary, but with the profits, what we'll do is we'll do a third to the business, a third to me, and a third to you as dividend at the end of the year on the profit. But you can have a core salary within it. Let's agree your salary now, what would be a fair number, and you just negotiate it the same way, where it's like, this is what I need to live, and you know, not be sitting panicking about my mortgage. You're like, perfect, like, let's take that number and add this to it. That sounds great to me.
Yep.
So that all you're doing is trying to find an equitable position with your business partners or with the person you're buying it from. But everybody gets sold. Like, everybody gets sold. And it's like, whether you think about exit planning or you don't, every single day there's business owners thinking, I want out of this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the pandemic took a lot of businesses away. Some people that have just been like, do you know what, I'd rather just exit my business and get something for it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could get somebody that was like a kind of young, energetic whippersnapper that wanted to like kind of grow it gangbusters and they had a track record of doing it, that's a pretty good conversation to be having.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that they like the fact that somebody's quoting them about buying it. It's quite an honour for somebody to reach out and say, well, I'd be interested in buying it. Like if EY reached out to you and said, look, I'd quite like to acquire Market and Mavens, it would be a big event. It'd be like oh wow, what somebody's offered to buy us. And even if you don't intend to sell it, it's still interesting to see how they derive value.
It's funny that, because I've been offered a few times actually, like people reaching out, and that, like, you know, going in the last episode, just people just cold emailing me.
Ah, exactly.
What about your business? Like, would you be up for it?
Still feels nice though, doesn't it?
No.
'Cause it's like, but to me, I think it's like you're obviously doing something where people are taking note. Like, it's a decent company, it's got a good brand.
Yeah.
It's like it's valuable. So it's like they're looking at it thinking this could be one of our 18 marketing agencies, and they've got a nice wee collection of them going in a wee portfolio. That's just the way that works. But they can leverage all of those assets to acquire that new one.
Yeah.
But I think it is that, like, a lot of people get really stitched up in this idea that you have to pay the entirety of the money up front.
Yeah.
And it's like there's no deal to be had, you can't negotiate it. And you will get, I've had unrealistic people, like, my business is worth 2 million, and you're like, based on what? You know, like your profit is, say, 100,000. So even if we do like 7 times your profit, you're still not at 2 million. So there's a 2 million, and it's like, but I've worked really hard, but it doesn't go on that. It doesn't go on how hard you worked. It goes on this is what it's actually worth.
Yeah.
So you will meet unreasonable people that are thinking, well, I think it's worth this, and I wouldn't walk away for any less than 1 million. You say, that's cool. So this one I have to pass up on.
So it's an important skill then to know your numbers then, and really then...
Aye, like how is value derived?
So you can do the value derived, but you can also look at, you know, the forecasting of it as well. So if we're talking about taking the profits out of the company,
I can afford to do it.
Can you afford to do that? Like, what extra effort is going to need to be put in?
And that's the beauty, is when you buy a company, you have full access to their books. One of the first things you would ask for is 3 years books. And from the 3 years accounts, you can actually map out, like, so you're not asking for the dressed version that the accountant's going to give you, because you will get the here's the nice version, but the reality is you can say, what the hell, they're spending this amount of money in marketing, and it's all going into like kind of crazy places. They're paying like let's say they were in a business premise and they're paying $4,500 a month, and you're like, just move where the business is located. You know what I mean? So one of the first actions would be like, right, we're moving out of there and we're moving into here, and it's like third of the rent. I've not got any rates anymore, it's done. And then when you acquire it, you say, okay, cool, done. What else is there? You're like, oh, these directors here are managers, I don't know what they do, or this was like a greenfielding exercise, we were trying to find profit in this market. Yeah, cool, that doesn't make any money, so let's just shut that down. So you can do that kind of stuff and leverage it, but there's often untapped kind of wells of money where they might have never done R&D, so you can claim 2 years of R&D back for the instant. So you could buy the company and then claim 2 years of R&D back for your very next move, and you would probably get what you bought into the company for back, depending on the size of the asset. At £1 million business, I would expect what you paid is your 30%. A big chunk of that could probably be R&D alone, if they've never done it before.
Wow.
And there's probably other ones, like if they're they bought premises and they do it up, then you've got capital allowances. Same thing as R&D, they can claim that back, again, up to, I think it's 15 years for capital allowances. And say like, oh, we had to paint walls and take down X, Y and Z, and you're not the person that done it, so you don't even pay any of that money, but you're still allowed to claim it because it's your company now. So you can say, well, my business did that, and like, you weren't even there, but it doesn't matter. It's amazing when you think about it. So it's like there's lots of things like that where you could easily find extra value in a company, and I think it's one of those things that people should consider, like, where does the value come from, and how can we get that kind of number?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit like buying a house, isn't it? If you're buying a property, you know, personally, like if you're trying to get like an investor there, they might go at that, right, well, we'll fork out 80% of it.
Yep.
You know, you get the 20%, or we'll do 90%. But you have that agreed, so the person gets the money, and you get that agreed structure. But essentially, like, you're going to then pay them back the money,
pay them back for it.
and they're probably going to get a bit of interest on it as well. So when you're looking to buy businesses, so is it important to get a network of people? Like, you know, can just somebody off the street just go, I'm going to just feel like buying a business? Or do you feel that you should probably like mingle with other investors or people that know what they're doing? Is that what you would see?
Well, how would I say that? I'm very risk averse, so I like to know how things work. So I personally wouldn't just kind of like take a punt and see, like, you know, let's see what we can do here. I know certain people that do that, they're very reactive and they learn the skill just by like throwing themselves in, and, you know, I'll build my parachute on the way down, so to speak. And I'm thinking that's not the way that I work. So like for me, first I established the value of buying businesses. So I done like a merger acquisition together, like both as separated exercises but at the same time. And I seen how much growth came from it. So I was like, this is a good thing to know. It's a good skill. And I think you should look at, if you want to achieve something, look at people that are already doing that and then say, is that something I would want? So you might look at someone and say they're very successful, but they're also very stressed out. You know, they look haggard, they're tired. You can tell it takes its toll to do that. So when you look at investments, I see something that's like working smart, not hard. I can see that there's way more leverage in it. So when I'm looking at it, I'm thinking down that kind of line. Like, so I would say try and study the form, like what other people are doing. Some good things to do is look at people like James Sinclair that has a YouTube channel. He speaks about acquisition heavily, very, very heavy investor. And he's very transparent about what he does and how he does it. Jonathan Jay is another one. He's got his own YouTube channel. He's got a book as well. And they're like the very few resources I've actually found on it, because there isn't a lot written about it. I think people are really guarded and private about money in the UK as well. Not just the UK, any of the Western world, I guess. But like, they're not very transparent. Like, you know, I made this on this deal. Whereas I don't think that should be a taboo. Like, it wouldn't bother me if you said, look, I bought this and I made 4.8 million on it, and I'm like, amazing, Mark, that's fantastic. Like, how did it come about? You know, I'm interested. You know, and it's like, I'll probably learn something from you, like listening to how did you attract the person to you? What did the deal look like? Would you mind if I seen the heads of terms? Some of it you might not want to share, but I think business owners should really get over that. Like, you know, the fear around talking about money, because you're like, it's not as taboo a thing. Like, who really cares? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't care whether I make $1 billion or I make $1 million. I'm probably going to pay myself very similar to what I pay myself.
It's funny because it's always a secret, isn't it? Like, when it comes to money, and like, people don't want to talk about how much money they make, or, you know, things like that, but or how much they charge. It's like a lot of things about like pricing. Like, I'm not telling you how much I charge you like that. Well, why?
Exactly. What's the great secret?
What's
the thing is, I can find out anyway.
Aye.
You know, I could easily find it. I could phone and say, like, oh, I need XYZ and get the price.
Yeah.
You know, you can kind of like look at it and say, what kind of house do they live in? What kind of car do they drive? And, you know, you can backwards kind of work out roughly what that person makes. But why does it matter? You know what I mean? Like, but I think with businesses, it's a case of just thinking, right, what is it I want, what is it I need from it?
Yeah.
And then going from there. But I would say that you acquire the skills for doing this. Nobody's born as an investor.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense, because I think it's important that you know, because again, if you're wanting to do the due diligence, you probably need to know the numbers. You need to know if the business can all look nice and flashy and beautiful from the outside,
but it's horrendous on the inside.
And horrendous on the inside.
It's been stripped bare. It's literally a shell with nothing on the inside.
You taking over a business where the culture is so poor, you know, and you've got to spend, you know, a year to try and build the culture back up, you know, and does that year eat into your payback terms because you just get staff that don't want to be with the business anymore, or there's been a high turnover of staff, or I don't know, the guys just, you know, taking lots and lots of dividends out of the business, like more than they should.
That happens like that kind of way, like, and that's only through looking at like their bank records and stuff. You can see that stuff. So you look through their bank records and you're saying, like, bloody hell, they were, you know, they've done quite a lot of stuff, sketchy stuff here with the money. And it is important when you're kind of doing that. But I think that's when you're looking at like buying that, or like when you're acquiring it, it's really important to understand like what debts are there or what risk. So like you'll have seen SWOT analysis. So it's like, I do like a kind of quick SWOT analysis. It's like, what's the greatest threat to this business? You know, they might have any, like, HMRC's had like a thing against them or something, and you're going like, right, what is that in Companies House? But that's your opportunity to ask. You know, when you say that, like, transparently speaking, is there anything that I should know about in regards to directors' loans or debts, or, you know, if you're reneged on a debt, what's the credit score of the business? I can check a lot of this kind of thing. I can, like, call clients, I can see, like, what the reviews are, so you can get a good sense of it before you can invest in it.
And then, see, talking if you've got like investors and things like that, what would people, or what's the kind of average sort of payback terms? Like, are they people looking for the money like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years?
Yeah, well, I think again that's I would call that a two-way negotiation. So you got a negotiation with what you're acquiring, and you got a negotiation with your investor. So, like, say for example, like the way I invest, I'm looking for basically £1,000 a month cash flow. That's what I'm looking for on a basic level. In other deals, it would be a case of, like, when I've loaned money, not that I'm a loan shark, but when you loan money to businesses, that's quite a common way of investing as well. A lot of businesses will say to me, look, I could do with £10,000 or £15,000 to achieve X, and they've got their head screwed on, you know what they're going to do with it, it's for growth. And I could give them 10k and then say, right, I want, you know, 12k back. And it's like, right, and I'll have it over a year. You just pay me monthly, £1,000 a month. So I'm just looking at how can you set that up. Now, with investors and stuff that I'd looked at, I kind of said to them, right, you would have your 40%, and then this is how you would basically receive your money. So I modelled it all to show them this is what you would receive. But I would also be quite happy if they said, right, what I would want is I'll put this money in, and then the first bit of this, I get that money back, and then I have a smaller shareholding in the business. So you could do things like a buyback. Like, I'll agree that you get 40%, but I'll give you the option of, like, extracting the entirety of what you put into the business, but then you drop down to 10% once we do that. And a lot of people go like, well, what kind of term are you thinking? And again, you'll see that in Dragon's Den quite a lot, because what they're doing there is they're mitigating the risk. They're freeing up their capital again to go again. So it's like, I've got 10% for free, effectively. Just for taking the risk of giving you the money. So it's like, if you don't make good on that, I'll own 40% of the asset in perpetuity. If you do, then I'll accept a buyback at the rates we buy today. One of the things I put in my head as terms with people that I buy into is how we will basically work out the value of the business at that time. So let's say I buy 50% of the equity in your company. I would say, right, what I would suggest is we basically take the profit of the business minus debt, and we multiply that by 3. So that's what we use to acquire today. But if you wanted, like, first refusal on the shares, it's the same ratio we would use. So it wouldn't be like we buy in at 3 but we sell back at 5, so that you're kind of like, well, hold on, I'm getting penalised for this happening a year after the first one happened. But it's all about being transparent, so they can see when am I getting my money back and how they do it. And a lot of people would do that. Like, if I say to you, like, you put this in, you get 40%, but if I hit these kind of numbers, I want to be able to buy it back, I'll give you back the entirety of what you put in, you'll drop to 10%. A lot of people wouldn't be upset about that, but everybody's different. So each investor's different as well, like what they're looking for. Venture capitalists, from as far as I can tell, they're mostly built around exit. So when the business gets sold, that's when they make their most money. So they're looking for that, like they're basically packaging it to sell. Whereas a traditional investor, like the type of investor I'm looking for it just to be like an ongoing asset.
Taking the dividends out of it.
If I'm investing in part equity, that's what I'm looking for. If I buy the full company, I'm looking for either merging it flat or flipping it. Like, there's almost like no in between.
But then you probably become venture capitalists eventually. As you get older and older and older, you'll be like, right, can somebody give me, like, buy me off, or because you're not going to want it forever and ever and just take.
Well, it's that way. I mean, you can convert it into like a trust or something for your kids. So
I suppose.
So you say, like, the company's, well, what's the value of the business, right? So let's just say the hybrid anchor's worth, I don't know, £500,000 or something like that down the line. But the group, Sargasso as a group, that holds, say, 93 businesses, like, at various equity or outright, it might be worth many hundreds of millions. But my kids can't see that, because they would get absolutely destroyed on inheritance tax. So it would make much more sense that on the event of my death that it goes into a trust, and then that trust manages the asset, and then that goes to my kids there. But you can hire an MD of a group the same way as you can hire the MD of a company. And I think, again, if you're making that kind of money, you're really just hiring a custodian to look after it. So you just put like it's quite a derogatory term, but a bean counter or an accountant, somebody that's like very, very good with numbers. You say, look, you will be paid handsomely, and your job's just to look after this asset and treat it exactly like a portfolio.
Well, that's great. You know, again, thoroughly enjoyed this episode, and I think a lot of people would as well, particularly in how to buy businesses with no money. I really, you know, from my business Belter, it was really interesting to kind of find out, you know, the ins and outs and the details of kind of brokering deals and things like that. And I think, you know, for the listeners, if they are looking to do this, I think one of the things is you need to go and you need to learn, you need to live and breathe it. It's not just, you know, once you start getting interested in it, you need to probably go and start. There's not many books out there, but start trying to like speak to others, like how they all kind of broker deals, or people that you know have sold businesses, bought businesses, and get involved with them. What about you? What's your business build?
I think for me, it's the try and get around businesses that are in that kind of growth potential. So we're both in Moorfoot Board, where effectively I would say 100% of us are interested in growth by acquisition. And that appetite has grown over the years, and I can well see that in the next year, 2, 3, 4 years, it's going to be a very prevalent thing within the group. So I think it's good to kind of find running partners, people that are doing this. Now, I suspect that many of us will have deals together, we'll have deals on our own, we'll have deals with other people. So getting around people that are kind of doing what you want to do is good. I would advise, like, you know, the Jonathan J book is really, really good for this. As is the case with many kind of books like that, it kind of pulls you towards like a course and different things. However, the information is dynamite that's in it, and it kind of shows it shows different examples of how this gets done, and I think it's interesting to read about all the different permutations that it can take, because it might open your mind to, I didn't even realise that would be the way you could do that. So I would say that it helped underline some of my thinking about it. But really importantly is just to kind of like jump into it, like try and learn to negotiate. So instead of asking for money, ask for equity with a few of your deals. If they don't work out or you don't make a very good job of it, what did you really lose? You didn't really lose anything. You're like, it's okay, we'll just do it as money. You know, it's like, it's the same as anything else. So that would be my business Belter, is try and get around the information and then just try and immerse yourself into it. Amazing. But slowly, you know, take your time with it.
Amazing.
That's brilliant. So just to wrap us up then, that's been an episode where we're talking about buying businesses with no money. Obviously the easiest way in the world is to buy it when you've got lots of money, but you'll find that most people do not buy businesses even when they do have lots of money like that. They generally leverage other people's money, particularly banks and finance houses. We're really loving this series of Business Belters, the long-term strategy. And it's really good to kind of dig into the meat and bones of these kind of topics like that. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash the subscription button and the bell so you get notifications when new episodes come out. Whatever podcast channel you are listening to is on. Some people are just audio, some people can put up with me and Mark visually and you watch us on YouTube. But we really do appreciate you guys, and it's great to kind of see people tracking along and finding a lot of value from the episodes. I would love to hear in the future, as I'm sure Mark would as well, that somebody actually decides to cross that line and buy a business because they've listened to this episode, whether it's years in the future, and it just inspired them to kind of think, do you know what, I'm probably not thinking big enough with my business. I'd like to acquire something, even if it's just another company or a share in something. You do that for you. So when you make profit in your business, or you're thinking about like, I feel ready to do that, speak to your accountant, speak to your coach, share that aspiration with them, because I'd love to hear about it, and I'm sure Mark would as well at some future point. So it's all that's left to say is it's a goodbye from me.
And it's a goodbye from him.
See you next week, guys.